Good afternoon and welcome to the debut spotlight. Hour 2 today. We have a double header, and our second guest is Jessica Waite, author of the brilliant memoir, The Widow's Guide to Dead Bastards. Welcome, Jessica.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, we're delighted to have you. We'll do a little housekeeping first. Uh, This is a mighty blaze. For those of you who are coming back as longtime blazers, welcome. We've got a great show for you today, and we're delighted always to have your support. For those of you who are new to the blaze, we are a group of about 30 creative professionals who volunteer our time to bring authors to readers and readers to authors. We got our launch at the beginning of COVID, and we plan to stick around for as long as you'll have us. So you can find us all over social media. The best way to follow us is to go to our website, amightyblaze.com, and sign up for our newsletter, which will come by email and provide all the information you need about upcoming shows and how to view older shows. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and perhaps someday TikTok, because we love our social media and we're always there to both promote our shows and our authors, but also to share all sorts of book news with our viewers. So today we have Jessica Waite, whose book has already earned a spot on Bookworld's list of 10 noteworthy books for July and August. It has been called Shockingly Forthright by Booklist, which goes on to say Waite's journey is consistently riveting as it moves from grief to rage and ultimately searches for acceptance. She holds nothing back. Her disclosures will leave readers gobsmacked. Kirkus agrees, calling it a candid and raw chronicle of bereavement, but it's also, as author Christy Tate says, a hell of a ride, by turns emotional, hilarious, and always very, very human. And Publishers Weekly gave it a starred review as a bracing account of Jessica's husband's sudden death and the secrets she unearthed after he was gone. And even though the pub date is next Tuesday, July 30th, through a fluke of distribution, the book is already on Toronto Star's bestsellers list for Canadian nonfiction. So that's a great way to start pre-launch. So congratulations on that, Jessica.
Thank you. It's been a wild ride, and yeah, I'm still pinching myself a little bit that it's got such a strong start.
That's great. Let me just share Jessica's bio so you can sit back for a couple more minutes before we start. Jessica never realized she was a latchkey kid because she lives so close to her small town library. Now she leads people to heal through writing, and she mentors incarcerated writers through the Hero's Journey Prison Writing Project. She is an award-winning essayist, and she lives in Calgary, Alberta, on Treaty 7 territory in the foothills of the beautiful Canadian Rockies. I've been in that direction, and I can agree with that entirely.
Yeah.
So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
It's very much my pleasure. So as people who follow the show know, I love to introduce debut novelists primarily and memoirs now and then. And this book got me from the start. As the title suggests, Jessica was widowed and her husband turned out not to have been such a good guy. And this is both a telling of it in very raw fashion, but also a story that appeals, I think, to anybody who's in a relationship or has been in a relationship with somebody who's not always what you thought they were. How'd I do? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think that sounds really, yeah, I think that sums it up. And I also think, relationships are hard at any level. And sometimes, people even good-hearted people can disappoint us, or, like some kind of thing will really like knock us down in life and love. And so this is kind of a story about getting drop kicked by by some really big discoveries when I was already reeling in grief over a man that I had been with for 20 years. We had built an amazing life together. We had a son who was 9 at the time that his dad died, and I knew that things were not perfect in the relationship, but I also sort of are like, well, we all have to weather these storms, and so we were kind of just like working our way through. Um, when Sean died suddenly, and then the day after his funeral, I got a box of his personal effects because he'd been traveling on business when he died, and I started to find out that he had been keeping a lot of really horrifying secrets from me. And so the story sort of, it's a little bit like a mystery at the beginning, like who was this man? That's what I wanted to know. Who did I marry and what was going on and how could I not have known? And then strange, as I was reeling with all that, strange things started happening around my home that didn't used to happen. Like my stereo was turning on by itself and my light bulbs were all burning out, and it was like very like paranormal
Real.
seeming almost. Yeah. Yeah. And then I had to look at like, well, what what's going on here? And in some ways it's kind of about like who and what can you trust, because the person that you loved and trusted the most betrayed you, and now strange things are happening, and is it all in my head or what's going on? And so the second half of the story sort of is about trying to make sense of all that, and can you come to terms with someone who has broken your heart in multiple ways, and can relationships heal across the veil of death? I think that is really the
Yeah.
central question that I'm asking.
Yeah. And as you say, the book sort of has this first half, second half, and the first half is um, in line with the title, is your discovery of many of Sean's hidden habits. Can you talk a little bit about what he was doing when he
Yeah.
wasn't being a workaholic?
Yeah, yeah, he really, and he genuinely was a workaholic, and worked really hard, but he I think he never was diagnosed with any form of mental illness, but we both have mental illness in our families, and I think that he, when he saw a psychiatrist, I think he didn't fully disclose, and I think that he had been fully symptomatic with bipolar mania. So if anyone knows what those symptoms are, they wouldn't be surprised that some of the things that I found out were infidelity, compulsive spending, hidden debt, and also he had been secretly addicted to and hoarding pornography. And so I found like a just massive cache of pornography that he had been cataloging and organizing basically since the advent of the internet. Um, and so there I was, like, totally immersed in grief and immersed in pornography as I was trying to figure out what was going on. And it sort of, yeah, it made me notice like some things going on with my perceptions and brain, just like, um, yeah, as I was delving into the sense making, and for my own kind of self care, I had to stop looking so hard in some of the darker directions at the beginning.
And I think there's uh, whether it's through this kind of a death or sometimes in a divorce where people just want to dig, dig, dig. And at some point it's maybe no longer useful.
Yeah, and I think that's a thing that really comes through in the story, is like I start going full bore into some of these places, but then realize when it's not serving it anymore. And one of those places, because the title of the book is, it's somebody who's angry, right? The Widow's Guide to Dead Bastards. It's name calling. It is not. It is, in some people say, like speaking ill of the dead, or putting, Sean was my late husband's name, like putting his reputation in jeopardy. Um, but what
You
I
didn't do
found
that. He
was,
did that.
well, and that's sort of how that this is sort of what I feel of, like let's be careful where we assign responsibility. Um, but also, what I wanted to talk about was like these roads that you can don't go down. And one of mine, a big one, was moral outrage. Like I was so outraged and angry, and the anger really fueled me to do some things, and it was really powerful at first, as long as I could kind of make meaningful changes and point it in the right direction. But at past a certain point, that outrage was eating me alive from the inside out, and I was like, I'm going to be trapped in this, and I don't want that. And so what else can I do? Because it's a looping thought, right? Like, I'm right, he's wrong. No one's going to argue with me about that. But being right didn't help me feel better, and so I had to figure out other ways. Yeah.
And I imagine it was complicated to both be actively grieving and actively outraged when both of them were, true, honest emotions, but are not usually colliding or
Yeah,
or
that
happening at the same time.
that was the hardest part, because the other thing that is true about Sean is that he was beloved by many people, and he really was, in his heart of hearts, I think, a pretty good guy, although he had this sort of shadow side. Um, and he was a good dad. Like, he loved our son, and I didn't want to take away that image of my son's father at the time that he needed it the most. And so it was I felt so pulled, like, between my own truth and pain, and then trying to be a good mom and trying to, like, hold that image of Sean up for everybody else who had lost him. I didn't want to, you know, drop them into the same level of pain that I had been in with my discoveries. And so, in telling the story, it took about 7 years to write this book.
Mhm.
And I think there's a kind of, as much as I was impatient and, I just kept wanting to be done, but there was a kind of mercy in the length of time that it took, because it allowed, our son to grow up a little bit. It allowed everyone else to sort of take these truths in about Sean gradually, a bit more gradually, and then to tell the story in a way that I think is actually, in my view, an expansion of his legacy and not a diminishment of his legacy in the long, long term. So,
I mean, you do get a sense of all of Sean's good qualities and your early days in your romance, and but also sort of your very real struggles as a young couple, and working with somebody who's traveling for business all the time, and all of that. But it also seemed like the act of writing may have helped you. You talk about sort of you were able to fully relegate this to the past. Like, this is
mhm.
now, I mean, largely, I don't know if I'm supposing this entirely, but that the door is sort of closed on that chapter of your life, so to speak. Is that true?
Well, definitely with the book coming out, I feel like there's some kind of threshold. But one of the things that I found through my grief experience, and not to get too, metaphysical about it, is that I didn't experience time in the same way when I was grieving as I did before. And I think, like, coming through the pandemic, a lot of people feel like these last few years been a bit blurry in the edges. And so I'm not sure that time, like, I think that time might be different than how we perceive it. And so, are things in the past? Yes, but I think the past and future are all connected through the present moment. And so I feel like what's in the past is, you know, that I was being like, that these events were dominating my life and my future, and that I was basically kind of incapacitated for a period of time, and writing
Mhm.
helped me get out from that point. And now, yeah, now I feel like I'm in a more, like, empowered relationship with the truth, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
How soon did you start writing or keeping notes just for yourself? Were you journaling? Were you
I've always journaled at times of anguish and stress. So, yeah, that was just a natural thing to do. And then, probably about a year to 14 months after Sean's actual death, I started writing. Yeah, I started writing more. And then, once the ideas got out of my head, I realized there was a story here, that even though the events of it are a bit anomalous in how things stacked up, that a lot of people go through these kinds of things. Everybody loses someone at some point. Lots of people feel betrayed. Lots of people feel some connection with someone who has died. And so, like, all of those things are part of the human experience. And so I realized that I had a story to tell, and that I wanted to tell it the best that I could. And so that's when I started trying to become a writer. I took a bajillion classes, and I became a writer in order to write this story. So, yeah.
excellent? It has been described as sort of a grief memoir,
Mhm.
but in many ways, it's also a life memoir. There's a lot of humor. There's a lot of family moments, both you, Sean, and Dash, but also with Sean's extended family, all of whom I think sort of live nearby.
Yeah,
Correct?
they live in Calgary, and so yeah, and then we're still in touch, and they've been very supportive, and yeah, yeah. So
I mean, they also clearly had must have had a reaction to your discoveries. Was that something that you were able to share with them immediately? Was that how complicated was that?
it was pretty complicated, and I go into that a little bit in the book. It's like, you tell one person, but are they going to tell the person that they're married to? And if they don't, then are you creating more family secrets? And like how, and then so how do things kind of roll out within the family? That part was complicated, and yeah, there were a couple people that I told right away, and then other people that it just happened a bit more gradually, to the point now where everybody knows, everybody's been offered the chance to read the book. The title, this is not the original title, and so the title caused a bit of, concern within some family members, which I don't blame them for. But yeah, it's here it comes, and ready or not, like for better or worse, this book is like in the world next week. So yeah,
Which is great. The book is
yeah.
called The Widow's Guide, whoops, to Dead Bastards. And you write at the end that people think, oh, well, it's just a provocative title and you're going to sell books because people are going to pick it up based on the title, which you want people to pick up a book. And so sometimes it is the title that does it. So to me, it certainly caught my eye. But then once you dive in, you can see why this title works. There is an element of obviously anger that title, suggests, but there's also the humor, the edginess, the rawness. There's something, this isn't just let me tell you how angry I am at my dead husband.
Yeah, no, and I'm really like, of course, nobody really knows knows me, but I'm not the kind of person who would be like, let's see how much mileage I can get out of this personal tragedy. Like, I would never do that, and
Right.
I would have never written this story if it was only to air our dirty laundry. Um, but what I love about this title, well, there's a couple things. One is that it was jokingly suggested by one of my late husband's best friends. So, like, the fact that it came from a friend is I love that. The second is how people, I was so nervous when I started trying to tell people about it, like face to face, I'd look at the floor and I'd be squirming inside. But how people react is they laugh nervously and then they
Mm-hmm.
lean in. And so I'm like, that is the best possible thing you would want with the title of the book. And the job of the title is to get people to pick it up and look on the back. And then once you do that, and by the way, I just have to say I love the the moon in the back with all of these blurbs from amazing authors that I respect and admire so much. But you'll see that, what the story really is about. And yeah, and it's a title that to me has a different meaning at the end than it does at the beginning, because it starts very angry, but it moves towards something else. And so,
Yes, it
yeah.
does. Yes, it does. Um, so, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about is for people who know my show, I'm always looking for not just good stories, but good writing. If the book could tell the best story, and if the writing's I'm like, no thanks. And there's just two quotes that struck me as I was rereading the book, and one of them is when you're writing about Sean, and you say his bad moods were polluting our home like a moose carcass rotting in a shallow pond. Could you be more Canadian?
I never thought of that as Canadian, but yeah, it absolutely is. And it's so funny. If I can just tell a little top story
Please.
that's a bit off topic. I met another author and we were chatting, and she was mentioning that she has a dog that has diabetes, and it has one of those glucose monitors like for humans. There's
Mhm.
veterinary ones too. And when she and her husband get into an argument, the dog's glucose monitor goes off, and it was like this, and it just made me think about the effects of stress in an environment. And when she told me that, I thought of that line in the book, like just of the like that there's something that's very big, pervading and contaminating the space around it. And yeah, it's yeah.
Well, you saw certainly glimmers of Sean's mental illness struggles, however you want to define them, early in your relationship. And your
Yeah.
relationship was sort of, you were friends. Talk about how your relationship started. It's very sweet
Sure.
too.
So yeah, so we met when we were both teaching English in Japan, and we worked for the same company but in different cities, and we became friends. And I could tell early on that Sean had a crush on me, but he was 5'7" and I'm 6 feet tall, so there wasn't like like a good chance for him to be successful there. But anyway, he was a real kind of foot in the door kind of guy, and so once I agreed to go out with him. He wanted to really prove himself to me, and he did do that. In so many ways, what made his like the discovery of his betrayal so awful was that he was in a lot of ways so good, and because he
Mhm.
was so good, I could find myself tolerating those bad moods because I knew it wouldn't last forever, right? I think a lot of
Mhm.
people, you find yourself in a situation where, you know, things are a bit up and down, but you hang on for the good times. And what was happening towards, like, as he got closer to the time of his death, is that the good wasn't going towards the family anymore. Like he was stretched so thin and things were really, not holding together for him. But I think for, anyone who's listening right now, it's so much easier to see in hindsight, like a time when you could get out or a way that you could get help or intervention. It's harder to see in the moment. Like I tell a story about a road trip that we took
Mhm.
down to Denver, Colorado, and there was a big thing that happened and I knew it wasn't good, but it's just in the moment. Do you know what I mean? It's harder to see, is this a
Well,
crisis?
you
Is this an
were
emergency? Or is this just someone blowing off steam, Yeah.
Yeah, you weren't home, you weren't close to anybody you knew, and, Sean was also, on the one hand, he was willing to get help, but, when he went to a doctor, he came back, "Yep, we're all good." And
Yeah.
saw a psychiatrist, "Yep, no more sessions, no meds, I'm fine." So it
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily sound like he was actually as willing to process as he sometimes proclaimed.
Yeah, I think so. And I think he was really afraid of the professional stigma. And I think this is one of the things that I think this book is being marketed toward women, but I actually think there's a story in here for men too about how hard it is, about the pressures, about the like, are you ever going to show that you're weak and vulnerable, that you need help? Are you ever going to ask? And the feeling that you can't. And that's one of the things that as I was writing through and coming to find some more compassion for Sean's position, that really was glaring to me is like how much I was willing to let him be everything to us on his good and shiny and, career ambition ways. And that I didn't see soon enough that how much he was struggling and yeah, like how much.
So you were also dealing with some element of guilt or introspection as to, could you have done something differently?
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
seems it seems that, while it's plausible that you might have been able to curtail his workaholism, and be more, and that could have changed. Clearly, his infidelity and his interest in pornography, which he was keeping so secret, you had no
Yeah.
clue. You had
I don't think I could have like really changed his behavior per se, but I do think like there are places in which I was complicit in my own ignorance without really realizing it. And those were the hard things like to admit to myself and in the writing of the book to be like, well, how did I participate in this? And so that like where those junctures are where I, had an intuition that something was wrong, tried to find it but didn't go to the next step. Like is there more that I could have done if I was a little bit more willing to see or understand? And if things had come to a head sooner, would that have led to a different outcome just because like Sean would have had to face his own truths sooner? So
As I like
yeah.
to say, we make the best decisions at the time with the best information. That's all you can. That's all you can do. Um, so one of the things you talk about is sort of these paranormal things that were happening in your house and with some other folks you met. and some, uh, appearances and things in nature that had significance, or in books. Talk a little bit about the books in the library.
Okay, I thank you for asking me about this because it's, you know, as you said off the top in my bio, I love libraries so much. I spent so much time in libraries as a kid. They're just my favorite places to be. And so right after Sean died, when we were starting to kind of go back to like normal life, one of the first things I did was take our son to the library. And I hadn't really been eating or sleeping properly. Just I didn't have any appetite and I was kind of woozy and I felt like I was going to faint. And then when I looked up again and was starting to get my balance, I could only see one thing and it was a little green heart on the spine of a book. And I stood up and pulled the book out and it turned out to be my book club pick, which was such a wild coincidence. But then the content of the book had a direct relevance to what I was going through, and it felt very uncanny. And then that kind of thing happened like again and again. And it almost felt like I was getting guidance through books. And then I didn't write that much about this, but as I was learning to become a writer, there were so many times when uncanny things started happening. The first writing workshop I ever went to, as I was leaving, one of the participants' husband was in the parking lot and he knocked on my window and I rolled it down and he gave me an eagle feather. And it turned out that he,
Gasping.
yes, but right, because in the story, like there's significance to eagles, and I got this eagle feather, and a feather's also like a quill, and it just felt like to me a kind of sign like from Sean that it was okay to tell this story because it took a lot of, guts and courage to break through the taboos of keeping the secrets, which I had, like I said, been complicit in doing for a long time. And so, yeah, so the ability to like be supported by the books I was reading, and then, to write a book that I hope will support other people. And I have to show you, on the spine of the book,
Oh, wow.
there's a little green heart. And so,
There it
yeah,
is.
I guess I have the Canadian version and you have the US version with the Atria logo in the heart. But yeah, it's like the fact that now that little green heart has translated through is just like so heartwarming to me. And yeah.
Right. Was it random that your book club chose this book that seemed to have parallels to your own story? And was that a difficult book discussion to participate in?
Well, I didn't hadn't told my book club at that time
Okay.
about what was going on. Like that was so soon after, like that was only like 6 weeks after Sean's death. So that was when I was just like you kind of alluded to earlier, but I didn't follow up with it. I was hiding my rage. I was just pretending to be only sad because I thought that's what people would expect me
Expected.
to do. Yeah. And so they didn't know anything. Um, but later I told them and they were like, what? So yeah.
Did you actually attend the discussion of the other book?
Yeah, I went to the discussion, but it happened that one of the plot points in the story is that someone wins the lottery, and one of our book club members, their family member, had just won the lottery, so there was a direct relationship to them too, and so that was what we talked about at that book club meeting, and I was glad to have the attention off of me because I wasn't ready to be in the spotlight in any way, shape, or form.
I can't tell you the number of times I have a discussion with somebody very randomly about some very random thing, and then open the book I'm reading, and on the very next page, those words appear. And it's like, how did that happen? And it doesn't, and for me, I mean, I read a lot and I probably talk a lot, but it probably happens once a month at least. And
Ellen,
that's
I'm
sort of like the paranormal stuff that was happening for
yes,
you.
it is like that, and I'm so glad you shared that because I've heard it called now like library synchronicity or like book synchronicity, where it's just there's
Okay.
things, and part of what like my biggest thing that I hope people would take away from reading my story is to pay attention to those things in your own life. Like I think, pay attention on the front side when you have an intuition that something's wrong, but also pay attention to those wondrous things and just start to notice like how does it feel when you notice that. And for me it feels really good. It feels much better than just being angry and betrayed and hurt when I think there's some kind of support coming from books or nature or other people, like when I can start to feel supported. That's, yeah.
Well, you at some point started taking care of yourself in some meaningful ways, being able to park your son with relatives and take off to do some work
Mm-hmm.
through um, various programs and with various individuals, some of which were, I had never heard of many of them. And so I think that kind of information uh, is, I learned a lot. And can you talk about which of those programs you would recommend for somebody who is newly widowed and whether some work better for you than others?
Sure. In broad strokes, because it's, everyone's situation is different, and so I'm loath to tell anyone else what to do. And so this is not a self-help book, although I've heard people kind of refer to it in that vein, because I do some things to try and help myself. But what I sort of in broad strokes have ascertained is that talk therapy can really help if you have someone that you trust, because you can sort of start to make sense of your story. But a lot of what's going on is also stored in your body. And so, any way that you can release that, whether it's your own fitness routine or getting some kind of body work, that sort of thing, that can also really help. And overall, I think the thing that is the most healing for any of us is a present moment attention, just paying attention to what's going on in your experience or in your own life. I think that's where healing comes from. And I think it's the most powerful thing that we have, that we don't even realize how powerful it is. But we should kind of realize when we see how much, tech companies are fighting over our attention, or advertisers are fighting for our attention, that paying attention to, like you said, the words in a book, or paying attention to each other's stories, I just think there's so much that's healing in it. And so if for someone, I was looking for things that would help people that weren't expensive and, didn't require a bunch of things. And so just paying attention to how you're doing and being gentle with yourself. I think that's the best thing that a newly bereft person can do.
Mm-hmm. You talk about one instance that was very moving for me, which was when you went to see Jolene for massage therapy. And you were having physical issues. And can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that?
Okay. So,
That was pretty moving.
yeah, so I had just driven like an 11-hour day in the car, and I was super locked up, and I was walking with a limp, and I went to see a massage therapist at my local community center. And when I got there, um, she said, she was sniffling, and I thought, oh no, she's got a cold, and I was gonna have to leave for a funeral the next day, and I didn't want to get sick. I was irritated. Anyway, she said, you have so much grief and trauma trapped inside of you that it's making me tear up a bit. And I work with energy. And if you're okay with it, I could release some of that for you. And I was like, okay, but I didn't really
She
know.
just knew this. She had never met you.
She'd never met me. I had gone to that clinic so many times. I had never been paired up with her. Um, but she just knew that I was locked in grief. And so then she just did some techniques that she has and used, I guess, her own intuition, and she's a healer. Um, and when I stood up again, I could stand straight, and I could like put my socks on like it was, and she didn't even, reef on my muscles or anything like that. And so, yeah, part of, again, my own process was like starting to have to confront my skepticism, because you know what I mean? Like, I think I was like I didn't really believe in that. I didn't really know what she was doing, but I felt better. I felt a million times better. Um, and so I couldn't argue with that. And so that's the other thing, is like, this book doesn't try to persuade anyone what they should believe. Um, but it does encourage, I hope, all of us to like pay attention to our experience. Like I was saying before, if something's helping you, if it makes you feel more hopeful, if it's healing, like there's no reason to let your pre-existing belief not, like, to rule that out. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So, yeah.
And you also found many people through your workshops, etc., who had similar experiences with, all the light bulbs starting to blow out and,
Yes.
electronics coming on and off. So, I mean, they
Yes.
must have at first thought you were going a little nuts.
I definitely did think that. That's what I thought, and I didn't want to tell anyone about it because I thought they would, put me on full-time surveillance. Um, but yeah, I when that stuff started to be normalized by a grief counselor, and then I started to do I don't write about this in the book, but I also did a lot of death education work. Like I took a program called Dying School with
Oh,
a teacher named Dr. Martha Jo Atkins, which was amazing. We don't get a lot of education around death.
yeah.
Um, and what I learned in that place was it was a bunch of people who work in hospice, who work in palliative care, like that these things happening is a bit of an open secret. It's not like there seems to be um, times when the veil between the living and the dying is thin, and people have these experiences, and for whatever reason, it's not very culturally welcome to talk about them openly. So I think you can get relegated into some very um, narrow stereotypes, I guess, if you talk about that. And so I was a bit afraid of that happening, getting called a flake and that sort of thing. But I was bolstered by the fact that almost everyone that I met that works in this field says, "Oh yeah," like that. They don't even bat an eye. They don't even,
Right.
yeah. And so that made me think that this must happen to a lot of people. And then another a professor at Rice University who studies this said, yeah, like probably like 80% of people, widowed people, have some kind of experience like this. And I thought I was the only one. And so yeah, I'm hoping that that will be the other thing that kind of comes out of this. If people have had that they feel maybe a bit more likely to just tell one friend, that that we don't have to keep it a secret, if we have some sense of connecting to our dead, because it's in my mind very optimistic, like that that it's like, yeah, that there's
I
not
mean,
just
I
like
think,
flipping a
in
switch.
Catholicism and other religions, the idea of, I'll meet you in heaven and we'll reconnect and all that is a very common comfort and belief. Um, but your experience has been, and you write about beautifully, is about kind of meeting the dead in the present.
Yes, yes.
And that too being, on the one hand, a little shocking, but also ultimately very comforting and allowing you a fair amount of healing.
Yeah, and I haven't talked about this really publicly, but it is also in this story, and I think this is a very common thing that people don't talk about that much, is with that idea that we'll meet each other again in heaven. Oh, so I'm gonna cry a little bit, but that's okay. I'm an easy crier. But how many people, when they lose someone, want to die themselves because that seems the way to meet again. Um, and so for me, the idea, like, or as it seemed to happen in my experience, that maybe we can meet again in the present, um, that shifted a lot of things for me, and definitely, um, yeah, yeah. I guess I just wanted to name that.
That's very beautiful. So I know we have some audience questions, and we encourage more listeners to put their questions in. But if we could see some of the first questions, that would be great. Did you have a ghost? Says our friend Renee Herskowitz.
Yeah. So the original title that I wrote this book under was Ghost of Boy Meets Girl, meaning ghost of meaning trace of, and boy meets girl meaning that it was a posthumous love story. So I never saw any kind of apparition or anything about ghost, but it is a word that I applied to my situation, at least mentally. So
Mhm. Other questions? Do you feel
do
you can ever trust another man again, or another person for that matter?
yeah, yeah. So that coming into trust that was the biggest obstacle, because my personal feeling is we need each other. Like we like we have to be able to trust and connect with each other in order to function in life and society. And so that was something that I needed to repair somehow. I didn't know how, but I explore that question of trust in the story, and essentially because I found all of these supports through books and friendships and writing, I feel like I was able to rebuild my trust muscle. So I have a sweetheart. And so if you're anyone who's asking like that because of personal experience, like don't count yourself out for love. You can love again after someone has broken your heart.
Beautiful. Other questions? Renee again. Do you still live in the same
Yes,
home?
I live in the same home.
Wow. Were you
Mhm.
tempted to move?
I was tempted to move so many times, but my son has friends in the neighborhood, his local school, like there were, and that just the stability. I moved around a lot as a kid, like many times, and it's so much work to move. So part of me didn't want to disrupt my son again because he wanted to stay here. And yeah, so we're still in the same house.
And you write a lot about just sort of the challenge of being a parent and a good parent to a boy who adored his father. And of course, at the time, could know none of the, more horrific things you discovered about Sean. Um, Presumably, he's heard all of this before. You've shared these stories, and will he be surprised by the book?
No, not surprised. And that was the interesting thing as he was growing up. There were times when there just came an opportunity to disclose something about his dad. And every time I did, I could almost see his shoulders dropping because he remembered because I was shielding him from some things, but not he still saw like remember the rotten moose carcass? Like he still lived in like the house where his dad would sometimes explode or sometimes, something would happen that was scary for him and didn't make sense. And so when I started to explain, maybe some of the mental health struggles and that sort of thing, that helped him understand better and make sense in his own life. And so um, yeah, he has read the book. He supported the title. But he also knows that there's a lot of love behind it. And so I don't think he feels the same. He doesn't feel the same shame that like I would have felt as a kid, I
Right,
think. Yeah.
right. Other questions? There's a book called The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, MD. Have
Yes.
you read it?
Yes, I've read that book. I think it's amazing. That's part of when I said, there's so much that's trapped in your body, and that body work can be a super effective way of shifting and moving through pain and grief. Yeah, that book is high on my list of good books to read.
Did you return to Jolene more than the one time, or was that?
Yeah, I went back to Jolene a few more times, and then she ended up moving a lot further away. And so,
Mhm.
but she knows the book is coming out, so hopefully I'll see her again soon. But yeah, as I started to like on the trust topic again, when I saw her again, um, she told me that I would write a book and she
Mhm.
told me that it would sell a lot of copies.
Oh,
And so
good.
yes, I know. And so when it accidentally hit the bestseller list before publication, I was so shocked, but then also a little bit not shocked because Jolene had said that. And she's not a
Great.
psychic. Like that's not her, like she's not a medium or anything like that. That's not her how she makes a living. But yeah, yeah,
That is
it's
a wow. That is a
yeah.
wow. Um, so I see one question. I'm going to post it myself. Oop, there we go. Randy William Gravitz. Do you have any book tour stops near New York City so I can get your book and get it signed?
Randy, thank you for asking. Yes, I'm going to be coming to New York in September, on September 4th at P&T Knitwear. We're having an event with the memoirist Molly Roden Winter, who wrote the memoir More, which hit the New York Times bestseller list. And so, yeah, September 4th, P&T Knitwear in New York City.
And Randy is saying he can see something in the book for me as a male. So I
Uh,
think this book is great for everybody. I think the sense of a relationship that where there's betrayal and or infidelity, unfortunately, shows up for many people in their marriages. Becoming a widow and then dealing with all that the widow part, perhaps, yes, all of that in one fell swoop, maybe not so often. But I think readers will be able to draw lots of personal sense of, they'll recognize threads that are super relevant to themselves, and at the same time feeling compassionate toward what you went through. And I think ultimately hopeful about where you are now and your future success.
Oh, I hope so. Thanks so much, Ellen.
Thank you very much. So if you haven't figured out that you need to buy this book, you need to buy this book, The Widow's Guide to Dead Bastards by Jessica Waite, a debut memoirist, and who has been a delightful guest. So please be sure to check out bookstore.org or libro.fm or anywhere you can buy books from, preferably from your indie booksellers. That's the way we support our authors, both by encouraging sales and giving them the opportunity to speak to us. I will be back in August with an 82-year-old debut novelist, Jane Campbell, who has written a book called The Interpretations of Love. And I encourage everyone to come back for that one as well. Till then, keep reading. And thanks again, Jessica.
Thank you so much. Bye.